Good evening, and thank you for joining me for a very different State of the Commonwealth address. In a normal year, I'd be delivering this speech in the House chamber to members of the House and Senate, the Cabinet, the Governor's Council, and our friends and families. But this is obviously not a normal year, so I'm sharing my thoughts with you from my office here in the State House. Tonight's address is just one more example of a gathering, a ritual of coming together that's been put on hold by the pandemic. But better days are coming, and like you, Lieutenant Governor Polito and I are looking forward to being able to join with family, friends, and colleagues because, as we all know, there's so much joy in being together. Now, 2020 was a year like no other. The pandemic changed everything. And it was much more than just the worst public health crisis of the last 100 years. It came with economic calamity, severe job loss, business closures, anxiety, fear, civil unrest, riots, racial injustice, isolation, death, and loss. COVID turned everyone's life upside down and did so in a way that oftentimes crippled our ability to share our fears and our loss with those we love. Like many others who have family members in senior living, I went over 100 days last spring without being able to see my dad. It was awful. And at the same time, my best friend lost his mom to COVID, and that was so much worse. Over the past year, thousands have lost their lives, and thousands more have been hospitalized, and we all worry that our loved ones could be next. But because of COVID, we can't visit or hug them. Now, back then, our message was, and still is, clear and compelling. Do the best we can to protect the health and well-being of everyone, keep our economy as open as possible, and keep our kids in school. Last spring, with minimal help from the federal government and our frontline healthcare workers running out of essentials like masks and gloves and gowns, we found a way to deliver 7 plane loads of PPE from all over the world to support them in a matter of weeks. The first came courtesy of the Kraft family and the New England Patriots, and the others followed soon thereafter. We also set up a program to help Massachusetts companies pivot their operations into mask and gown making mini factories. Now we have a stockpile of masks, gloves, and other protective gear to keep our frontline workers safe for years as they treat patients. Back then, we held daily press conferences for almost 4 months to keep everyone informed about what we knew, and just as important, what we didn't. To keep individuals and families informed, we built and maintained one of the most comprehensive daily dashboards available anywhere. And to keep people safe, we built and continue to operate one of the largest free COVID testing systems in the country. Over 13 million tests have been conducted so far, making the Commonwealth the second largest per capita tester in the continental United States. To make sure we understood the science of the virus, we recruited some of the best healthcare minds in the Commonwealth to provide us with guidance and advice. We also responded to the devastating impact COVID had here and all over the world in senior care settings by investing over $400 million in our long-term care facilities. We brought COVID testing programs directly to our long-term care residents and staff, and we recruited experts in infection control to work with industry to help our seniors stay as safe as possible. These efforts combined to dramatically reduce infection rates, hospitalizations, and the loss of life in senior care settings for the past 8 months. And we continue to feed over 1 million people through our food security programs. Millions of private, federal, and state dollars have combined with local efforts and private nonprofits to support families across the Commonwealth. Through it all, our aim has been to keep you as factually informed as possible, to keep people safe, the economy going, and our schools open. And as the federal vaccine distribution program kicks into high gear over the next few months, anyone who wants a vaccine will be able to get one at a site near them, and we can start to put this pandemic behind us. Now, as you know, our economy and the jobs and purpose that come with it have been pounded throughout this pandemic. Last February, our economy was humming, but COVID hammered it. Now, led by Lieutenant Governor Polito, we worked with public health experts and business leaders across every sector of our economy to gradually reopen without rekindling the virus. And over the next few months, hundreds of thousands of residents went back to work. Today, we're in much better shape economically than we were last spring. But far too many people still can't find a job, our downtowns are hurting, and many of our small businesses have been crushed by the pandemic. Our Small Business Relief Program, the largest of its kind in the country, has made a real difference. This program is putting over $700 million into the hands of struggling small businesses so that they can get to the other side of this second surge. Thousands of companies have already received over $230 million in grants, and thousands more will benefit from this effort over the next several weeks. Our Shared Streets program came out of our weekly discussions with local officials and has made it possible for municipalities to reimagine their downtowns so that more people could eat outside when it's nice, or safely ride a bike or walk to parks or schools. But here too, there's much that remains to be done. Now, if there's a silver lining in all this, it's how organizations and individuals from every corner of Massachusetts stepped up to confront the pandemic and care for each other. These heroes are the most beautiful part of this most difficult experience. Their resilience, creativity, and commitment gives me hope. And because of who they are and what they do, I can say to you tonight that I know the state of our Commonwealth is strong. The healthcare system in Massachusetts is the envy of the world, and they've reaffirmed that throughout this pandemic. Under-equipped, overwhelmed, and struggling to learn how to fight back and beat down a brand new virus, they have and continue to give this battle everything they have. Fire, EMS, law enforcement, our first responders in the Massachusetts National Guard come whenever they're called while risking infection and illness. Grocery store workers and countless small businesses feed, assist, and console their communities. Caregivers, many of whom have never taken a day off, provide 24/7 attention to children with special needs and our most at-risk populations. The Salvation Army, the Red Cross, YMCAs, food banks, pantries, and hundreds of charitable organizations pivoted on a dime to feed, shelter, and assist those in need. The individual efforts, the ones we don't hear a lot about, carry just as big an impact and are no less noteworthy. Neighbors in Milton banding together to collect furniture, pots, pans, and bedding, to help a local pastor move a woman into a new apartment after she ended up at his church with nowhere to go. A young woman from Western Mass who refused to quit completed her 10-year journey from custodian to nurse practitioner at Bay State Medical Center in the middle of the pandemic so she could do more to take care of the sick. A restaurant owner in Quincy opened his doors to feed needy families, only to be followed by what would normally be his competition down the street, who did the same thing. Wedding photographers, planners, and a facility operator volunteered to put together a wedding for an Army sergeant from Chicopee and his fiancée after their plans were upended by COVID. My wife Lauren, the First Lady, and several volunteers stood up the Massachusetts COVID-19 Relief Fund and raised over $32 million from 17,000 donors. And this effort helped over 500 community organizations and hundreds of thousands of families with food, rent, and other emergency assistance. The Boston Bruins national anthem singer, a staff member at the Commonwealth's probation department, sang his heart out at food pantries and lifted up exhausted healthcare workers between their shifts. I could literally go on for hours and still never thank all the organizations and people that we owe a huge debt to for helping us get through this. They and all those who find the strength and compassion to support their friends and neighbors are our heroes. And while COVID returned this fall with a vengeance, here in Massachusetts, we're seeing our way through it. Our entire healthcare community, while stretched, has the gear they need to take care of patients and far more knowledge about what works and what doesn't than they had 10 months ago.